Hey everyone, so the final of the 4 topics in this short how-to series is technology. It might seem that technology is sort of less important or a smaller issue than kit and clothing and the bike choice, and why am I making a video about it? The fact is that if you haven't got the right technology, you're more or less not going to be able to continue in the race. So say your GPS dies and you can't follow the route, or you haven't got lights. If you can't see anywhere, you can't cover any distance. So although it's a smaller, and perhaps easier topic to solve, it's by no means less important than the others because it's crucial to be able to continue forward progress. There are a few areas within technology that I want to discuss. So we have the GPS device, you have the lights, you have potentially a watch, you have an alarm, you have a backup of all these things, and you have your mobile phone as well. And I'm going to save that one till last because it's probably the most important. GPS devices, thankfully in this modern day and age we don't necessarily need big OS maps, and when you're trying to navigate somewhere doing this, following it around can get quite complicated. We do live in the 21st century and you are more than welcome to take advantage of that. Nothing against, still having an OS map, perhaps even cutting the pages out, writing some cue sheets. But if you can make life a bit simpler for yourself, and if you are racing where time is critical, then having a GPS device is useful. Now, having done the analysis and looked at the terrain, topography and things like that, we can start to figure out what kind of GPS device we're going to need based on potential charging capabilities. So you have stuff like the Edge 1000, and I've used this for quite a few years. This doesn't have, or has an internal battery, so you're going to need to charge this every sort of 10 hours of use. Therefore, if you're kind of in a remote location, perhaps in Kyrgyzstan, where power supply is a bit more limited, you might not want to be taking a device like this. You might want to be taking a device more like the eTrex, because the eTrex takes AA batteries, which you can buy anywhere. You could also take rechargeable ones, if possible. If you are racing across Europe, though, in transcontinental, this is what I used for quite a few years, worked quite well, and I often stopped at hotels most nights, so I could charge this up quite easily. So there are some things to think about there. You can generally download maps online. I can put a link in where you can download those from, and you can do that. This takes SD cards, so you can always put routes onto the SD cards on the go. I've been using an Android phone, which allows me to put an SD card in, so if I need to change anything, I can do that. I'll come back onto it, but one of the other GPS devices that you do have where you can do routing is your phone as well. And perhaps it might not be your main device, but it could be your backup device. Now, when you're planning a route and things, as we sort of discussed in the first one, you can then get that all onto your device, and you need to make sure that that's working for you with like sort of turn by turn, so it's beeping at you or not beeping at you, depending on when you need to turn. So there are a few things about that, and I would say make sure that you have used your GPS device before you go racing, so that you know how it works. Lighting is as important as your GPS device. Okay, so if you're not racing flat out, you might not be riding straight through the nights. You might be sleeping a bit more, which means you're going to be riding in the dark a bit less, making lights a bit less important. That said, if you don't have a light, you can't see. Often, you need to think about the terrain you're going to be using the light on. So again, if we come back to racing on tarmac, using a dynamo is by far one of the best choices because your front light's going to be working really well. Even when you're going up climbs, it'll be a bit dim, but it should be good enough. And then you can attach the rear light and your lights are just covered and you don't need to worry about them. However, if you start racing off-road and into mountain bike ultra endurance events, there's the potential that dynamo lights just simply don't really work at all because the speed that you're going along at is not generating enough power, so the lights just are not bright enough. And when you are off-road, you need the lights to be even brighter than when you're on-road because you're having to pick out all the nuances in the terrain, rocks, water and all sorts of things, so lights are more important. Therefore, you might want to consider battery-powered lights rather than a dynamo-powered light, or perhaps both in conjunction, depending on the opportunities in the terrain in the race. If you're racing off-road, you might want something like this Exposure Diablo that I have here, and this is can be used in multiple situations. You can use it as a bar-mounted light, just so you can see normally, and you can also put these on your helmet, so then you have a helmet light. And helmet lights actually come into use and more obvious than just for riding along. But if you're looking for a bivvy spot, helmet light can be really useful to turn left and right and look around and just off the road where your front light is pointing. And then if you have to do any bike repairs at night time, having a headlight is just so useful because you can see your bike easily. Okay, if you're racing in a tarmac event, there might be more towns and things around you, so you could stop and do stuff there and make use of that lighting. However, if you're racing off-road, it's just not possible. So lights are really important as well, and you need to think how they're going to be working based on the terrain that you're covering. Watch. Now, so watch, why is that in here? Well, I'm quite bad at timekeeping, and when I'm fatigued over multiple days, timekeeping becomes even worse because you're tired and you can't really think quite clearly. And I found it possible to lose like hours in periods of times looking for food and things at points. So one of the things I did do was I got a watch, and then when I step off the bike, I start the stopwatch, and I can just keep a track of time. That might seem like really a bit nerdy, or however you want to call it, but it's actually really useful because one of the things to make you fastest in an ultra endurance event isn't necessarily pedaling faster, but it's wasting less time, and so that's really useful. The watch, you could also use an alarm and just keep track of time that way as well. One of the things is you could also use it to set up beeping notifications to get you to eat and remind you to eat and drink, and you can also use GPS devices to do that nowadays to beep to remind you to eat and drink up to certain distances or time frames. There are lots of really clever things you can do with the GPS device as well. Alarm, okay, you're going to need an alarm, might work on your watch. You could be using your phone as well, because you're going to need to get up every morning in the early hours of the morning when you're still far too tired, and you're not going to be doing that naturally. So you want a loud alarm, a noisy alarm, and perhaps you might want to consider putting it away from you. These are small things, but you need to make sure that the alarm, you can't snooze it easily, because one of the things is you just put it on snooze mode and it turns off. Now, backup, it's all good and well having like one light, but that's not enough. You need at least two lights, and I like to have at least one backup of a GPS device and one backup of a light, if not perhaps more. So normally I would have a dynamo light, and then I'd have a battery powered light. So if the dynamo stops working, I've got the battery one, and if the battery one stops working, I've hopefully got the dynamo, because who knows what's going to happen. And if you only have one light or one GPS device, you're not going to be moving anywhere if it stops working. So it is a really critical and crucial point within your kind of whole bicycle system. And often the backup sort of GPS device, so I might have like the Garmin Edge, the internal battery is my main device, but say the dynamo stops working and I can't charge this while I'm riding anymore through the USB charger, then I've got the eTrex as my backup, which I can put AA batteries in. So if the dynamo breaks, I can still keep navigating. So you need to think about how, if something stops working within your system, you can then keep moving through using slight alternatives that work in a different way. The final point is your mobile phone. So obviously mobile phones are incredible things, but they're also a complete crutch, and you can lose a lot of the experience of the race using a mobile phone. So I would personally say, if you don't necessarily need to be, sharing your story online or these other things, perhaps consider don't taking a phone. Now, the phone, you can also get like the mapping device on this. So I have the Ride with GPS app on my phone. I have all my routes downloaded on there, and it can do the full navigation for me. So that's essentially a third backup device. And the phone also acts as a torch, and then it also, and these things. So the phone can act out as a good backup for a lot of things. And it can be quite quick and easy to find things on the map on the phone. So although I say don't take a phone, I find phones really useful. But you just need to be aware of how you're using your phone in the race, and are you using it a bit too much? Are you again coming back to it and wasting time, because time is critical. So it can be a useful way to save time. Often when racing transcontinental, I use the phone on booking.com or whatever to book hotels. So it's a really useful way to save time, but it can also be a way to waste time. Now, all that said, I would definitely be up for a race where mobile phones were not allowed. Create a level playing field, and it could be quite a lot of fun. So if you have any questions about technology, how that might work for you and how it differs between different races, then get in touch and I'll be happy to answer some questions. Cheers.